Angela by John and Yoko. That's right, John Lennon and Yoko Ono, Plastic Ono Band. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Our guest for the hour is Angela Davis. Angela, does that song bring back memories?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely it does. Yes. I can hardly believe that 40 years have gone by, 4 decades. And it's interesting because on October 13th, a couple of days ago, someone said, "Isn't this the anniversary of your arrest?" And I thought about it, and I said, "Yes." The person said, "Isn't it the 30th anniversary of your arrest?" And I said, "Actually, it is, but it's not the 30th, it's the 40th. And I had to explain that I generally remember the date of my liberation, but I think I repress the date of my arrest.
Well, let's talk about that. So you went from, well, first getting a job to be an assistant professor at UCLA, to Ronald Reagan, then governor, having you fired, to teaching 1,500 people anyway, because they came out in solidarity, students and professors, to ending up in jail. How did you wind up in jail?
Well, while I was teaching at UCLA, I received threats literally every day. Death threats. As a matter of fact, someone even came into the philosophy department looking for me. I was not there, and they physically attacked Professor Kalish, who was the chair of the philosophy department at that time. So it was necessary for me to have security, and during those days it was armed security. On the campus, the UCLA police accompanied me to each class, and they searched my car each day to make sure there had not been a bomb planted and so forth. And I also had to have people who were doing security for me in my house and wherever I went. I should say I always like to point out that the UCLA police did a marvelous job of doing security on the campus, but they waved goodbye to me every day as I exited the campus. And I used to like to say that UCLA wanted to make sure that I wasn't killed on the campus. They really didn't care what happened after I left the campus. But in any event, I purchased a number of weapons, and people who did security for me used those weapons. One of the persons was the younger brother of George Jackson, Jonathan Jackson. And on August 7th, 1970, he took those weapons and went into a courtroom in Marin County, San Rafael, California. And Jonathan was killed in the process, as were a number of prisoners. Jonathan was very young and very passionately involved with his brother's situation, George Jackson. He really wanted to see his brother free. And while he was active in the campaign to free him, as many of us were, I don't think that Jonathan recognized that perhaps we could indeed free them through our activities, organizing activities, the building of a mass movement. In any event, as a result of the event on August 7th, I was charged with murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy because the guns that were used were registered in my name. And after that, of course, I was placed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. I was underground for several months until I was arrested in New York City on October 13th, 1970.
And you were held for more than a year in prison.
I was held for 16 months. I was released on bail before my trial took place. So the whole ordeal lasted about 18 months. I was arrested in October of 1970, and my trial concluded with an acquittal at the beginning of June, on June 4th, 1972.
How did your experience in prison and going through what you went through then shape you today and your work in these 40 years, in these 4 decades?
Of course, one always creates narratives of one's life in retrospect, and I do think that the period of time I spent behind bars helped to consolidate an interest which was already there, namely working around cases involving political prisoners. George Jackson, of course, helped us to understand that it wasn't just a question of freeing political prisoners, but it was a question of looking at the institution of the prison and its repressive role and its role in shoring up and reproducing racism. Actually, I can talk about the fact that my mother was involved in campaigns to free political prisoners. She was a very active member of the National United Committee to Free Angela Davis, but she had been involved as a college student in the campaign to free the Scottsboro Nine. I had actually, in a sense, followed in her footsteps.
The Scottsboro Nine were the young men who were accused of rape.
9 young black men who were accused of rape in Alabama and who were arrested and held in prison for many years, some charged with death. And the last Scottsboro defendant was not released until the 1980s.
You've mentioned
and so I was saying that
Go ahead.
No, I was saying that, in a sense, that work around political prisoners is in part an aspect of the way I grew up. It was, in a sense, in my blood already when I began to work on cases such as the campaign to free Nelson Mandela, the campaign to free Lolita Lebron and the Puerto Rican political prisoners, and, of course, the Attica brothers and many others.
You were born, Angela Davis, in Birmingham, Alabama, home of Bill Connor. Interestingly, Condoleezza Rice just came out with a memoir of her time in Birmingham, her civil rights growing up, as she describes it.
Yes, we grew up in the same area. I didn't know Condoleezza Rice. She lived in a different part of the city, and she's somewhat younger than I. But it's always interesting to see how trajectories can be so markedly different, even though one had what one might consider to be a similar upbringing.
It's very interesting, and we can have a longer discussion about that. Maybe we'll have you and Condoleezza Rice on, and it will be a very interesting time of reminiscence.
I'm not sure about that, but...
You know, it's interesting. Recently, we had Michelle Alexander on, the author of The New Jim Crow. And she said there are more African Americans under correctional control today, in prison or jail on probation or parole, than were enslaved in 1850, a decade before the Civil War began, which is an interesting way to link your work today around the issue of prisons. The U.S. has more prisoners than anywhere in the world, back to the middle of the 19th century, when Frederick Douglass was enslaved, your newest book.
Absolutely. And of course, any of us who are interested in African American history, and particularly the Black Liberation Movement, have to address Frederick Douglass, the system of slavery. And